As we mentioned earlier, last week, Soundgarden and Audioslave frontman Chris Cornell took his own life at the age of 52, and countless fans and publications have been paying tribute by looking back at the many highlights of his long career. We want to pay our own respects by discussing Cornell's undisputed greatest achievement, Soundgarden's 1994 grunge classic, Super Unknown. First, a little bit of background. Soundgarden could actually be called the first grunge band. They formed several years before any of their Seattle peers and were the first grunge band to sign to a major label. At the same time, they wouldn't find mainstream success until after Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Alice in Chains sent grunge into the stratosphere, but even then, Soundgarden struggled to reach the same heights of popularity. Then, by 1994, a grunge power vacuum seemed to magically open up. Kurt Cobain and Alice in Chains' Lane Staley were both spiraling toward addiction-induced collapse, and of course Kurt would commit suicide just a month after Super Unknown's release, and Pearl Jam were doing everything they could to not be famous. Soundgarden seized the opportunity by crafting a 70-minute hard rock classic loaded with hits, including the Grammy-winning Spoonman and Black Hole Sun, which for a time made them the biggest rock band on the planet. They accomplished this by abandoning their punk and heavy metal roots and instead fusing sludgy Zeppelin-style riffs with poppy psychedelia. They also experimented with alternative tunings and non-traditional time signatures, which still help set the record apart from the countless alternative rock acts that would rip this sound off for the next decade. Grunge came to an end soon after Super Unknown, but the record continues to be viewed among the era's greatest achievements. So what are your previous familiarity with Soundgarden in this album in particular?
I mean, I know Black Hole Sun and I know Spoonman. I remember being a little kid and the Black Hole Sun video just constantly being on television.
Right, they're like on a hill or something in the
yeah,
the
I can
sky is, like multicolored or whatever.
Yeah, I can like see it in my mind. Yeah, like vaguely.
Yeah.
But beyond their radio stuff, I listened to this album like one time when I was a kid and didn't really like it, and this is the second time I've ever listened to it.
For real? When you were like obsessed with grunge, you didn't give Soundgarden
I never
a try? We all went through a grunge phase.
I gave it a try, and I was like, oh, that was garbage. Stick to the radio hits, and never listened to it again.
I went through that grunge phase that everybody goes through and was obsessed with it. Even got into like Pearl Jam and stuff, which, is a little bit too like alt rock for me now. But I just couldn't get enough. Like after I discovered Nirvana, I had to go into Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, of course. And, it just never like really resonated with me like basically all those other big name grunge bands. But, I had an appreciation for it. What about you, Darren?
So, kind of like you guys, I was, familiar with the hits. I don't really recall listening to this album in particular a lot or anything. I just never really felt like it fit in with the term grunge. And I guess I was sort of a bit of an elitist when it came to like Nirvana. I just really thought Nirvana was really the only thing that sort of mattered. And some of these other bands were just tagging along, I guess, but we can get into that. And I sort of, I made a little comment when I said Black Hole Sun. Really, it's just that, it's one of those songs that I feel like I've heard so many times. That it never really resonated well with me. So it's just something that, as soon as I heard the news, like that song just kind of like came into my head, just played for like the entire day in my head. It's one of those things. But how would you guys describe the sound of this record?
I think you basically, got it in the intro there. It sounds kind of like Led Zeppelin. Chris Cornell sings a lot like in that Robert Plant kind of style. But even the riffing is like kind of Zeppelin-y. It has like a sludginess that is kind of grungy. I think it sort of makes sense in that, but obviously if you listen to Soundgarden's earlier stuff, it's like more it's grungier. And it's interesting that like they kind of have like a metal background, and stuff like Nirvana's Bleach and a lot of Alice in Chains is like very metal-y actually, which is kind of surprising. It's like metal slowly turns into alt rock through the prism of grunge. But instead of getting like too alt rocky, I think this stays a little bit interesting by having these interesting kind of like psychedelic flourishes. I mean, like Black Hole Sun is the perfect example. I mean, it's basically like a pop song and sort of sounds like, you know, something, I don't know, it sort of like reminds me of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, or even like I Want You, She's So Heavy, like the way that song's written, you know, like this kind of lumbering, like repetitive but slightly psychedelic thing. And I think there are enough flourishes there that make it not just sound like a grunge Led Zeppelin ripoff, but something kind of unique.
Yeah, I'll agree with you. It doesn't sound like a Zeppelin ripoff in any way, but they do have that, like, you know, similar style. You could tell they're like influenced by, but they're not just trying to be that, which, you know, is okay.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it finds its own place and its own sound, and I, you know, would argue with anyone who would disagree that like Soundgarden did not basically lay the foundations for what would be, as we kind of, you know, talked about in the intro, like alt rock for the next 10 years plus, you know what I mean?
Yeah. A lot more than Nirvana, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. I mean, what, you know, listening to this album today, you know, an album from 1994 honestly sounds like it could have come out last year, you know what I mean? And it would not have been that big of a deal. It would have just been like, yeah, that's kind of like another alt rock 97X kind of band, you know, whatever.
No one knows what radio station you just mentioned.
Yeah. Sorry. Alternative rock radio, whatever.
Whatever it is in your town.
Yeah. So, you know, we don't want to obviously do an entire formal, you know, review track by track or anything, but like, let's kind of get to like the bigger picture here. Like, where does this album, you know, sit in the history of grunge for you guys?
I mean, it's an interesting question. I tried to hash it out all week because, yeah, it's kind of late, right? Like 94, it's sort of like the last big moment in grunge history. I mean, if you sort of like, I feel like everybody gets obsessed with grunge when they get into high school or something, and you learn about Nirvana, you learn about like Nevermind just like explodes, and then all these, you know, bands from Seattle all of a sudden get big, and Pearl Jam becomes like really popular, but Kurt hates Pearl Jam because they're basically like arena rock, and he thinks they suck, and, you know, all this shit happens, and then, yeah, everything kind of like calms down or starts going in new directions. People like Tool come out, Radiohead are, you know, they're there, but they're about to get good, and, you know, things are about to change. And then like all of a sudden, you know, the last gasp of grunge is this record, Super Unknown. And it's like, kind of like you just said, it sort of like cements the transition from grunge into alt rock. And that, you know, that sounds like a negative thing. I don't think it necessarily is, but it won Grammys and shit. It went like 10 times platinum or whatever. It's like finally grunge completely digestible for moms and dads everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think you summed it up pretty nicely. It is like that. It's kind of the first of those alt rock bands that unfortunately kind of took over for quite a while.
Yeah,
I don't want to speak too negatively, since, you know, I mean, the guy just died, but you know, I just don't see anything in this record. It's on the other side of that alt rock bridge where it's pretty bad.
You can't appreciate like the singles. I mean, as just sort of like definitive 90s singles.
Spoonman's kind of fun. I kind of like Spoonman.
I love the way you say that.
You know,
I
I was bitching about the water noises earlier. Kind of like the spoon noises in Spoonman. If you listen in headphones, like there's some light little. I like whenever there's like a object mentioned in a song, and then the sound of that object is like added. I like that.
Who is weirder than Dan?
Yeah, I know.
His tastes make no sense.
So, you know, I have some pretty strong feelings about this, and I've had strong feelings about it since, you know, getting into Nirvana and all this stuff. And you know, I really think that Soundgarden, and I feel the same way about Pearl Jam, you know, they just don't seem to fit what my sort of perception of like grunge is, where it's like this sort of do-it-yourself kind of band, and like, you know, you listen to it and you feel like, I could do this, like I could go out and pick up a guitar, like and
the
just
punk
try to
side of grunge.
Yeah, and like, because these guys, they seem like, you know, if it wasn't for Nirvana, you know, or like that sort of explosion there, these guys would be like, you know, the next Guns N' Roses or the next Van Halen like band, because they've got, you know, incredible singers. I mean, you mentioned Robert Plant, but I was sort of thinking of like Sammy Hagar from Van Halen, like Chris Cornell, like he has that kind of voice, and so did Eddie Vedder. Like they just had these like huge stadium
arena
rock
voices.
Yeah, it's arena
doesn't
rock.
seem to fit. And unfortunately, I hate to sound like this, huge Nirvana geek or whatever, but like I just feel like that is what grunge truly was. Like this, Kurt's voice was something that, even though it was very unique in itself, you just felt like I could do something like that. But when I listen to this record, it's like I just don't connect to it the same way, And so what I'm saying is, like, I think it would be better to just say, like, this is the beginning of alt rock. Like, give them the credit that's due as like the alt rock, gods, whatever you want to say it, call it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Darren. This is if this album didn't come out right as grunge was big, no one would call this a grunge album. This is the other side of that bridge, becoming alt rock, and it's just arena rock with a little tinge of the 90s thrown in, I guess.
Well, do you guys consider Pearl Jam grunge?
Pearl Jam is absolute garbage. It may be worse than this.
All right, but are they grunge?
No,
they're not grunge.
It's arena rock that came out in the 90s.
Yeah, they happen to be from Seattle, and
exactly
right at that time, I just feel
they
like
wore flannel though.
Didn't everybody in the 90s? The guy had a couple.
Yeah.
I have to say though, and maybe I should have listened to Soundgarden when I was younger, because I have a deep dark secret. I used to listen to Creed. And they owe their career to Chris Cornell.
Yeah, that's true.
Creed is just this a couple years later. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to. I sort of enjoy. I mean, I guess I listened to it more than you guys did back in high school, which is sort of the prime moment to really fall in love with this, and I think a lot of people do and still will. So I was sort of like nostalging out on listening to it this week, and it's never been like my favorite. I think it's obviously like too long. I mean, it's huge,
right?
And it gets a little like samey sounding. And yeah, I get what you're saying, Darren, where it's not like as inspiring as something like Nirvana. I mean, it doesn't sound like something I could do. There's a lot of like technical proficiency. Mm-hmm. He does sing like a great singer, but I mean, I kind of like the sort of like the soundscapes of it. I mean, like it's like these weird sludgy kind of textures. It's like Zeppelin riffing, but you can kind of hear the use of alternative tunings and stuff that make it kind of like an interesting, I don't know, like the interplay of the guitars. Yeah, it's kind of Guns N' Roses-y, but it's like sludgy and like, I don't know. It's like if Guns N' Roses listened to Sonic Youth for a couple months and then made an album or something. Right. It's like there's something sort of different about that. I mean, I think that a lot of alt rock bands like Creed were like, kind of trying to rip this off, but just not nearly as good.
Yeah,
I would agree with that.
I mean, I'll give them that they're the originators of a not that great form of music.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I feel bad, like, we're paying tribute to somebody that I don't think we're huge fans of, which we haven't had to do before, but obviously it's very sad. I mean, it's crazy. Like, what was up with grunge that, like, nobody can survive it? Like, did grunge just attract these, like, depressed people that are just tortured geniuses with drug addiction? And, what is up with all these grunge icons dying all the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you probably hit the nail on the head. It's probably just the people it attracted.
Well, and I think that genre, I mean, that's the sort of the subject matter that the music was dealing with. I mean, even Soundgarden had that song, like Suicide or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of hard to explain, obviously, because I don't necessarily relate in that regard. But kind of looking at it from a broad perspective, it just seems like that was depression, drugs, just trying to figure things out, I guess, and maybe not quite getting there. It seems strange, this whole story, because, he like had tweeted about playing in Detroit or whatever, like a couple hours before, and then suddenly just that. I mean, you always have to wonder, like, what happened between that moment and his last moment,
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they said it was something like he was taking like Ativan, which is like an anxiety medication, and he like may have taken too much, and it can make you kind of loopy, but it's not like you're just gonna like kill yourself if you never thought about that before. I mean, dark times for some reason in the early 90s, and maybe it's something he sort of has like lived with for a long time, and then maybe it was medication, or maybe it was just some sort of last straw or something. But it is terribly sad.
They had mentioned during like the Audio Slave days too that he had been dealing with addiction and stuff, and it just seemed kind of strange because it was so far apart, so far away from the 90s. I figured when I was seeing him in Audio Slave, I thought that was like, he's cleaned up, he's no longer grunge, he's whatever. But
and didn't that one guy, Scott Weiland from Stone Temple Pilots, he died recently.
Yeah. But he was always like super,
Yeah, he was
up.
real bad. Jesus, it was a hard time. All right. Well, rest in peace, Chris Cornell. Very sad again. We ready to move on to the proper reviews this week?
To hear the rest of our discussion, check out our website, metaforkmusic.com, or search us out on iTunes, Metafork Music.